WWE Chief Content Officer Triple H discusses the recent Bray Wyatt return and why they approached the return the way they did regarding the White Rabbit. Plus, JBL is back on Monday Night Raw and has the newest client he's describing as the modern-day wrestling god. Brock Lesnar and Bobby Lashley brawl to open Raw last night. The Good Brothers are scheduled for Crown Jewel and a New Japan event during the same day. Road Dogg was in charge of Raw last night with Triple H's absence. We've got a ton of NXT versus AEW news as they go head-to-head tonight on USA Network and TBS respectively. Plus, we've got the ratings for this week's edition of SmackDown. Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone's doing very well. As always, there are plenty of news stories to get into in the world of World Wrestling Entertainment. We're going to get into Raw and the happenings from that show last night. But first, we've got to talk about Bray Wyatt because we've got some interesting news when it comes to Bray Wyatt's return. Triple H's thoughts on the whole process. And of course, he's the key man involved here. We can talk about Bray Wyatt. We can talk about his character. We can talk about Uncle Howdy. We can talk about the Wyatt Six. But Triple H, Paul Levesque, he's the guy that put it all together in the first place. He's the guy that signed Bray Wyatt to a contract once again. He's the guy that's now booking Bray Wyatt's return and working in conjunction with him and other creative members to produce what we saw last Friday on SmackDown and what we're going to see going forward with this Bray Wyatt faction return, etc. So Paul Triple H Levesque has spoken about Bray Wyatt's return. Now, of course, the conclusion of WWE's Extreme Rules Premium Live event saw the return of Bray Wyatt. He, of course, had been released by WWE in the summer of 2021. Now, in the lead up to Wyatt's return, there were a number of cryptic clues, teasers, videos, etc. That got a lot of people talking. There were a number of QR codes pushed out and plugged onto WWE television on the commercial breaks and at house shows. Jefferson Airplane's White Rabbit would play in the arena with a red light centered around the ring or entrance area. Now, the Wrap has a piece about Wyatt's return and how it had a positive impact on WWE's television ratings, with Paul Triple H Levesque commenting on the build-up to Wyatt coming back and felt how it was a massive payoff for the company. Here's what Triple H had to say, quote, "We asked ourselves, how could we bring back Bray Wyatt in the most engaging way possible? So we created the White Rabbit Project, intended to lead our audience down this literal rabbit hole of content to help build anticipation for Wyatt's return at Extreme Rules on Peacock. It started with flickering lights in arenas and continued with the release of other Easter eggs, like hidden QR codes within episodes of SmackDown and Raw, that led viewers to more clues that kept them guessing and tuning in each week. It culminated in what we believe was a massive payoff for our fans and for WWE. This is a great example of how WWE is uniquely positioned as a sports and entertainment property to harness the power of our shows and social following to develop multimedia long-term storytelling that can help produce meaningful, aggregated audiences." Now, of course, Wyatt's first in-ring segment since coming back closed the latest episode of Friday Night SmackDown on Fox last week. We did a video covering all of that, but it's interesting to hear Triple H talk about that. Certainly, I mean, it did just that. It really did bring the viewers and bring people like myself and the fans and you name it. Everyone that engaged in it was buzzing about the White Rabbit. I mean, I think you're going to look at that and you're going to look at Triple H. What has he done since he's taken control of WWE, certainly in the creative aspect of things? What's he done? I think, look, he's brought back a ton of big players. He's brought back people that have been released. He's tweaked gimmicks, changed gimmicks, and the content of Raw and SmackDown is much more watchable, I believe, nowadays, and the ratings are reflecting that, and the stock price is also reflecting that, so that's certainly positive. But you would argue the biggest project that Triple H has done since assuming this role of WWE's Chief Content Officer is the Bray Wyatt return and the White Rabbit Project, as he's calling that. I mean, you look on social media, you look at the merchandise, you look at the discussion, you look at television ratings, everything's been a massive tick. You cannot dispute that the White Rabbit teaser and the White Rabbit vignettes were not a massive success for WWE and Triple H. It was a massive win for them and everyone involved. Look, think about it. Again, look at the optics and the metrics that it was driving on social media. Look at the merchandise. They put a little bit of White Rabbit merchandise out there. It all sold out immediately. It's like gold dust. And that was before Bray Wyatt even showed up on television. And remember, for the longest time, until I believe the SmackDown before Extreme Rules, so 24 hours before Bray Wyatt actually came back to the company, it was never acknowledged on television. Never. they had QR codes. No one spoke about white rabbits. It was all social media driven. It was kind of sort of guerrilla marketing, kind of let's put it out there, but let's not acknowledge it. And it's a massive success story for WWE. And I think what they have seen through this is that the pro wrestling fan base, whilst there's a lot of silly people out there and a lot of division out there, they have some of the most creative minds in the world. And sometimes you need to let things be ambiguous. Sometimes you need to let things kind of just organically put stuff out there and let the imagination of the audience take it where it wants it to go, because that's what it really is. Because it started off just by Jefferson Airplane's White Rabbit playing in arenas. That was it. That's how it started. And everyone's like, oh, what's that about? What's that about? What's this meant to mean? And that's the key thing here. So I think it's a huge success story for WWE. And ultimately, this next phase of Bray Wyatt's comeback and the characters, the Uncle Howdy, the Firefly Funhouse, the Wyndham Rotunda promo, that's going to be what it is, and we'll have to wait and see. We can't judge that yet. It hasn't happened. What we can judge is the build-up to Bray Wyatt's return, and Bray Wyatt's return at Extreme Rules is one of the most memorable returns in recent WWE history, and obviously that's because of the execution of it, how they managed to produce at Extreme Rules. But the reason why it's one of the best returns in recent history is because of the anticipation. Everyone tuned into Extreme Rules to see if Bray Wyatt was the right White Rabbit. Everyone tuned in to see if they were right, if all of the clues and all of the mystery that had been put out there, if Bray Wyatt was the guy. And they were rewarded for their hard work. They were rewarded for being invested in that teaser, in that campaign. So I think that's a huge win for WWE, and I think Triple H deserves a lot of credit, and everyone involved, Rob Fee, Bray Wyatt, whoever contributed to that, I think did an excellent job. Now, let's talk about Raw last night, and we saw the return of John Bradshaw Layfield. JBL is back, and JBL referred to the returning Baron Corbin as the modern-day wrestling god. A wrestling god, as he would say, as he introduced his newest clients on this week's edition of Monday Night Raw in Oklahoma City. Now, in typical JBL fashion, this was... it was so good. I mean, Raw was okay up to this point. You had the Lesnar Lashley stuff, which we'll talk about in a second. But for me, the JBL segment, and it's very rare that I would say any segment involving Baron Corbin was the most entertaining part of the show. But this is probably my favorite thing on the show. I thought this was brilliant. In typical JBL fashion, the Hall of Famer ripped on the fans, mocked that deadbeat dad Rey Mysterio, accused Dolph Ziggler of stealing money from WWE for 15 years, and took several shots at the current WWE locker room during his return promo, saying none of them would be able to lace up the boots of anyone in the Attitude Era, my era. Now, JBL then initially explained that Mysterio being switched to the SmackDown brand had facilitated the greatest trade since the Bambino came to the Bronx, as he confirmed that Corbin had officially joined the Raw roster. This is what he said, quote, "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to get on your sweat hog feet, put your chubby redneck hands together, and introduce the greatest addition to Monday Night Raw in its history, Mr. Baron Corbin," JBL said, whilst introducing Corbin as his new client. Now, Corbin did step out to the same Happy Corbin theme song he's used over the past year or so. However, he was sporting a different outfit. He's also received new pyro during his entrance. He went on to defeat Ziggler with the End of Days, as JBL continued to praise his new clients from the commentary booth, which he was excellent, by the way. Kevin Patrick, I'm not sold on, it must be said. I was thinking this throughout the entirety of the show. Corey Graves does his job well, but Kevin Patrick, it's not the accent. It's just, he's just missing something. He feels out of place. It's very early to judge. It's only been 2 weeks. So I can't say that, oh, you know, it's not working, rah, 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 because I don't know if it's not working, but he just felt a bit off. And JBL, it must be said, was a breath of fresh air on commentary, being not JBL the commentator, but being JBL the character, the heel announcer, was fantastic. Now, the JBL Corbin pairing was first teased on the September 2nd episode of SmackDown, where a white limousine with JBL's signature horns pulled up next to Corbin in the backstage area. Once the windows rolled down, a familiar voice could be heard saying, "What happened to you?" followed by "Get in." Now, Corbin had not been on WWE television since he drove away in JBL's limo last month. It had been reported in recent days that JBL was expected to be at the next few tapings of Raw, which seemed to indicate he was about to introduce a repackaged Corbin as his client. Corbin's victory over Ziggler on Monday also snapped his 4-month losing streak dating back to early July. Corbin had lost 15 matches in a row, including at live events prior to his alliance with JBL. And it must be said, like I said, it was probably my favorite thing on the show. I really, really enjoyed it because it just felt, it reminded me of just why I'm a pro wrestling fan, because JBL is so unlikable, and he's such a good heel. Like, you love to hate him. And when I was growing up, you legitimately hated JBL. You didn't love to hate him, you hated him. But last night, nobody on that show cut a better promo than JBL. Now, obviously, JBL, with him comes a ton of baggage about his backstage antics in the past. He is a bully, all that kind of stuff. But I really enjoyed it. The whole time I was watching this, I was listening to it, JBL's promo on the audience, the way he was really bigging up Baron Corbin, the way he was putting him over. I know that the rumor or reports have been that this is only meant to be a thing for a few weeks to really put some momentum behind Corbin. But immediately I went, I don't want this to end in a couple weeks' time. Run this till WrestleMania. And I know JBL might not want to do it. I know JBL might be a little bit like, look, I've got other things going on. I don't want to travel that much, etc., etc. But if they could just get to WrestleMania, because I watched this last night and I thought, you know what? Baron Corbin with JBL as his mouthpiece, with JBL getting real heat on him, not as if Baron Corbin doesn't have heat anyway, but JBL really, genuinely could, I believe, facilitate Baron Corbin becoming world champion. And I know that's a really big statement to make after one promo, one match, one presentation, but I just thought it worked. It just worked, and it was so good. And I didn't even have to talk about the way that JBL's trousers fit him last night. JBL's fit was outrageous on Raw. But I loved it. I really did like it. So I'm all in. I'm all in on the JBL Baron Corbin connection. I thought it was fantastic. Brock Lesnar was on Raw last night. He was called out by Bobby Lashley, and things got nasty because for years, wrestling fans, they've been clamoring for a Brock Lesnar-Bobby Lashley match. And while the Dream Bout finally took place at the Royal Rumble back in January of this year, fans will be treated to Lashley versus Lesnar 2 at the upcoming Crown Jewel Premium Live event on November 5th. This week's Raw in Oklahoma City began with Lashley calling out Lesnar a week after the Beast returned to WWE and laid out the Almighty with two F5s, a German suplex, and a Kimura lock in Brooklyn on the season premiere of Raw last week. Now, this week, Lesnar answered the call and sauntered down to the ring as he smiled and saluted the crowd. This led to an irate Lashley charging outside of the ring to attack the Beast, and the two behemoths wrestled around the ringside area until Lashley evaded an F5 attempt and speared Lesnar through the barricade. The brawl continued with referees, trainers, even WWE superstars themselves. Everyone emptied the backstage area and ran down to the ring to try and separate the two monsters. Eventually, Lashley slammed Lesnar through the announce table at ringside, with fans in Oklahoma City chanting Bobby as Lesnar grimaced in pain. Later in the show, WWE's announcers Corey Graves and Kevin Patrick confirmed that Lashley and Lesnar will lock horns in Saudi Arabia in just a few weeks' time. Now, in the previous encounter earlier this year, Lashley, of course, captured the WWE Championship from Lesnar, courtesy of a Paul Heyman double cross against the Beast. The very next month, though, Lashley would win back the WWE title in an Elimination Chamber match, ironically enough, in Saudi Arabia, and that was the last instance of the two legitimate fighters sharing a ring together. Of course, in that Elimination Chamber match, Bobby Lashley never touched anyone. He was injured at the time. He had a shoulder injury. They wrote him out of the match. Therefore, the Lashley-Lesnar Part 2 couldn't happen, but it's going to happen in just a few weeks' time. I thought it was a great segment to start off the show. It started off the show red hot. I think it's good that Lashley got some offense in on Brock. I think that, that they protected Lashley very, very well last week. You have to remember that Lashley got two F5s, Kimura lock, German suplexes. Then Rollins had to hit, was it a couple of stomps, a pedigree, and more to defeat Lashley for the United States Championship. So they kept him very, very strong. And they also, not that they haven't had Lashley as a credible threat, but they need to build him up like this is a real credible threat. I still think Brock wins at Crown Jewel because Brock really hasn't won any proper matches since he came back to WWE at SummerSlam last year. Yes, he won the Royal Rumble, and yes, he won the Elimination Chamber in dominating fashion, but as far as any other matches goes, he's just lost. He's lost to Roman Reigns 3 times. So I expect Brock Lesnar to win this match. I don't expect him to put over Lashley because, of course, Lashley beat him earlier this year, and whilst Vince McMahon is gone, 50-50 booking still exists, and they want to build up Brock, I think, for a big match come WrestleMania season. It might be Brock versus Bobby Part 3. Lesnar loves a trilogy. Lesnar loves having multiple, the same opponent several times. So I expect Brock to win that match. But I really enjoyed the segment, and so did Oklahoma City. It was an excellent way to start off Raw last night. Everyone loves a good pull-apart brawl, and it was excellent. So a very well-done segment, and I'm looking forward to Crown Jewel to see the two face off. The Good Brothers will also be at Crown Jewel. Remember Karl Anderson, when he said he was never returning to WWE, he said he would to do a Saudi show to get another pull. Well, congratulations, Karl. That pull is on the way, because a week after returning to WWE, Karl Anderson and Luke Gallows got off to a triumphant start with a victory over Alpha Academy on Raw last night. However, just as the Good Brothers celebrated in the ring with AJ Styles, they were confronted by the Judgment Day. Finn Balor, the original leader of the Bullet Club faction in New Japan Pro Wrestling, went on to remind AJ Styles and co that he started this stupid little club and he will break them because he can. The Judgment Day would then challenge the OC to a 6-man tag team match at the upcoming Crown Jewel Premium Live event. Styles immediately accepted the challenge. Shortly thereafter, WWE confirmed the match between the two factions in Saudi Arabia. Simple, you would think. Well, maybe just not exactly completely simple, because interestingly, Karl Anderson is also scheduled to defend his Never Openweight Championship against Hikuleo at New Japan Pro Wrestling's Battle Autumn Show in Osaka on the very same date. On November 5th, he is scheduled for a match in Japan and also in Saudi Arabia. That's not possible. While New Japan Pro Wrestling is still advertising the match, it is possible it will be moved to another event later this year. Fans on social media are speculating that Anderson's title defense against Hikuleo could happen at one of the New Japan Strong's Halloween-themed shows in New York later this month. Earlier reports suggested that Anderson will be allowed to wrestle for New Japan despite signing a new contract with WWE. Furthermore, Anderson and Gallows had previously indicated they were committed to wrapping up their commitments with New Japan Pro Wrestling at the Wrestle Kingdom event in January of next year. According to Fightful, the Good Brothers were previously working for New Japan on a verbal agreement when they were under contract with Impact Wrestling. It's likely the same trend will continue now that they've returned to WWE on what is being described as a big money deal per several reports. So he's not going to do the match in Japan on the same date. He's not. I know you could say, well, why won't they move the Saudi show? Why won't they move the Saudi booking? Why won't they just switch the match, or they'll write him off of television? They will not do that, because Karl Anderson will say to New Japan Pro Wrestling, I will do that match at another time, because that match that he's scheduled for at Crown Jewel will be his highest paying match of the year. Being booked on these Saudi shows is like gold dust to these talents. They get so much money for appearing on their shows. The biggest amount of money they'll get all year, they get from appearing on these Saudi shows. So Karl Anderson will not be missing Crown Jewel. He will be missing that match in Osaka. What they could do, as I mentioned, is do the match, you know, later in October. As I mentioned, at these New Japan Strong shows, I expect that. It's going to be fascinating to see what happens. As I mentioned, they never signed a deal with New Japan. And they never signed deals to appear at these shows. It was verbal agreements. And the expectation is, as I mentioned, they are going to just continue to work the shows they're committed to. Once they're done, they'll be full-time with WWE. Stuff will have to get moved around, though. It's going to be fascinating to see if they make Wrestle Kingdom, because realistically, then what you're going to have is New Japan stars, AEW stars, because Moxley, Jericho, etc., Bryan Danielson will probably be working those shows, and WWE stars in the Good Brothers all working a pay-per-view in a different country. That is fascinating. We'll see what happens once we get an update. We'll talk about it here. Road Dogg, of course, was in charge of Raw last night. Triple H, we did a short on this yesterday, so be sure to check that out. Triple H, unfortunately, tested positive for COVID-19. Therefore, he was unable to be at Raw last night and NXT tonight. And PW Insider reported that his fellow D-Generation X partner, Road Dogg Brian James, will be taking his place, or took his place, as the point person for last night's show. Ed Koskey and Michael Hayes were also involved in the creative process, while long-term WWE official Bruce Pritchard is absent from the show, having had a previous vacation planned before Levesque came down with COVID. Now, the report suggests that last night's show was very much a team effort. Although Levesque isn't live in attendance, PW Insider did report that he had been on the phone throughout the day to make sure everyone is on the same page in terms of the vision for the show. And obviously, the show went off without a hitch. It wasn't a problem last night, so it all went fine. Anyway, Elias is back in WWE. There's some bad news, though, for the fans invested in the Ezekiel, Elias, and Elrod storyline. On last night's show, Elias confirmed that Ezekiel was no longer a WWE superstar, referencing Kevin Owens' brutal attack on his younger brother back in August. Elias said, quote, "It feels great to be back. As you may or may not know, my younger brother's career was tragically cut short. But that's the reason I'm here tonight. We have a saying in our family that the show must go on. Now, just as Elias prepared to perform an emotional piece on his keyboards, Matt Riddle interrupted him with a pair of wooden bongo drums. Riddle would ask Elias if he wanted to hit his bong, but the Drifter said he just wanted to perform his song. Eventually, US champion Seth Rollins would also interrupt Elias' concert, drawing the ire of the returning superstar. Towards the closing stages of the Rollins vs. Riddle match which followed, Elias tried to get involved, but Rollins countered by hitting the stomp on the original Bro for the victory. But afterwards, Rollins took out Elias with a stomp and prepared to do the same to Riddle until he was ambushed by Mustafa Ali. Of course, earlier on in the night, Ali had interrupted Rollins' US title celebration, but ended up suffering a beatdown at the hands of the Visionary. It would appear that WWE is teasing a Rollins vs. Ali title match for Crown Jewel, although some believe we might be heading to a fatal four-way match. We could see Rollins versus Ali versus Elias versus Riddle. We'll have to wait and see, but it's good to see Elias back. I mean, they did as good as they could do with the whole Ezekiel storyline, etc. But Elias is the character, and now that his beard's back, Elias is back, so that's the situation there. Tonight, we've got a rehash of the Wednesday Night Wars, but on Tuesday, the Tuesday Night Wars, because WWE is planning a big promotional push for NXT to defeat AEW Dynamite in head-to-head battle tonight. As I mentioned, it will be the first time since the Wednesday Night War that Dynamite and NXT will face off on the same night in the same time slot, and Brian Alvarez of the Wrestling Observer tweeted on his super followers feed that fans watching last night's Raw should expect a promotional push for the NXT episode. He said, quote, "Huge promotional push for the show. They're determined to defeat AEW. Massive NXT promotion beginning today." And we certainly saw a lot of main roster stars be confirmed for the show, including Rhea Ripley, who'll be returning to a television match for the first time in 3 months, where she was sidelined with a brain and teeth injury. Last night on Raw, Cora Jade picked Ripley to face her rival Roxanne Perez on tonight's episode of NXT. The match will mark Ripley's first televised match since her injury, although she did return to in-ring action at a non-televised live event this past Saturday night in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So Rhea Ripley is going to be on the show, which is certainly going to be interesting there as well. So Rhea Ripley, as I mentioned, is going to be excellent. But it wasn't the only main roster stars that were confirmed for the show, because Cameron Grimes, NXT star, has also found tag team partners in Luke Gallows and Karl Anderson ahead of his 6-man tag team match with The Schism Tuesday night on NXT. In a backstage segment during last night's Raw, Grimes approached the OC with a proposition. He said, quote, "See, I've been having a problem with these Schism brothers in NXT, and I could really use some help," Grimes said. "I'm here to see if you boys want to be my tag team partners tomorrow night." Gallows replied, "I don't know if you know this, but we're cash only, brother friendly. If you need a couple of partners in NXTs, then we're your guys." Grimes celebrated before walking off as the OC playfully bickered amongst themselves about cryptocurrency. So, it's going to be the Good Brothers appearing on the show, which means, by the way, Gallows and Anderson in the last 18 months would have appeared on Dynamite, Rampage, Impact Wrestling, New Japan Strong, Raw, and NXT. Pretty good going on the Good Brothers. Good Brothers, I guess, are running the show. Finally, SmackDown. We got the ratings for this week's episode of SmackDown, or past week's episode of SmackDown. Per Brandon Thurston of WrestleNomics, SmackDown drew 2.274 million viewers. This is up from the October 7 edition that drew 2.243 million viewers. In the 18 to 49 demographic, the show drew a 0.54 rating, which is the same from last week's edition too. SmackDown finished number 5 in the demo or on television for the evening. Of course, it featured the return of Bray Wyatt on the show, so of course they'll be happy with that. 2.274 is okay. It's not as big as the 2.5 they did a couple of weeks ago, but it would prove once again that there is some buzz following the Bray Wyatt return, which has driven the ratings, certainly. So there you go, guys. That's the latest WWE news for you. Be sure to smash a like on the like button. Be sure to subscribe, bottom right-hand corner, and I'll speak for you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right-hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.